Thank you, everyone, for being with us. We are so excited about this event, and we'd like to begin with words of welcome from our President and Chancellor, Dr. Couture.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this event. What a great event it is. This is organized, I know, by units, but with also political science, and I want you all to know that my tenure is in political science department. I want to take credit for that. It's nice to see all of you here. We also have our Senator Rodney Ellis here. In his district, we are here, so please give him a very, very big... Are there any other elected officials I may have missed out? Okay. I just want to extend welcome on behalf of our Board of Regents and, of course, on behalf of all of us here in the land of the Red and Cougar Nation. We know why we all are here, but I just wanted to tell you how excited personally I feel about just getting to learn more about the history. What an opportune time for us to do so. We've just beat Rice, right? Thank God. Well, it's just nice to see our two heroes here. Both of you in different ways, one in sports, one in activism here on campus. You both broke barriers. You both took a lot of things that was totally unconventional, and not everything was pleasant. I know that. It was tough. It was very difficult. What a courage it must have taken. You inspire our athletes, our students, people like me, all of us here every day. And I just feel, and it's now to me about 5 years being here at University of Houston. I was very happy when I came here. I felt really blessed to be coming to this great city and the great university. And I truly feel so blessed now and so honored to be here because what an incredible history we have had. The things we have done here, things we have experimented here, things that we have innovated here in different ways just make this university a truly special place. And I feel just so humbled every single time I'm in front of people like yourself. And so today, thank you very much for coming back here, for gracing us, for giving us part of you and part of your wisdom. Your involvement and your engagement and your encouragement is going to push us to really continue on this path of excellence. So on behalf of all of us here, please know we love you, we cherish you, we respect you, and we just absolutely are eager to hear what you have to tell, because I know formally you have never been asked to tell your story. So today is the day. Tell us your story. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, Dr. Couture. And yes, we are so excited to have you here, and we're proud of who you were when you were 18 and 19 and 20 years old, but we're certainly proud of who you are today. Let me begin by thanking, on behalf of my partner, Dr. Susan Scarrow, the chair of our political science department. We would like to thank our partners in this event, the African American Studies Department and Dr. Conyers, the Center for Public History, the Houston History Project, and Dr. Pratt, the Honors College, and the Phronesis Department, Dr. Collins, and most of all, we'd like to thank Andrews & Kurth, the law firm where Gene Locke is a partner, and Elizabeth Campbell, who not only enlisted a lot of his colleagues to come, but also generously is underwriting our reception. So thank you. One of the reasons that we wanted to do this event is because at the very heart of who we are at this university, we are teachers. And so we wanted our students who walk around on one of the most diverse college campuses in America to understand that it hasn't always been this way. All of us who work here, who live here, who teach here, we have the experience of going in an elevator and hearing someone speaking a different language, or people from different backgrounds, religions, and countries. And so we want our students who are here today to have that experience of hearing how we got here. We also loved the RSVPs that we got from our alumni who said, "This is my story. I lived this." So let me just ask, who is here who lived this? Yay! That is very exciting. And lastly, I want to say to the children of Don Chaney and Jean Locke, you have probably been rolling your eyes for years hearing about these stories about the olden days, but I hope that today that you understand that your dads did something really brave and really hard simply by deciding this is where they were going to come to school. And for those of us who did not live that, it is really hard to understand the risk involved in simply deciding to be a student here. So to your families, we hope that this is also a great day. We are going to have a conversation. Let me just say, as Dr. Couture introduced both of you, Don, you left home from Baton Rouge to do something that your mother thought would make you a pioneer, something hard. And you decided to come here. And Jean, you were a student activist with the arrest record to prove it. A lawyer, a recent mayoral candidate, and someone who has managed to straddle the lines between respect in the business community and still down with the people. So let's begin our conversation. So Don, I'm going to start with you. Just to put things in perspective for us, can you just start by talking about your family and growing up in Baton Rouge and what that was like?
That's kind of a long story, okay?
So the short version.
All right, I'll give you the short version. I grew up in a family of four. Actually, my mom and dad divorced when I was in the first grade. And so my mom basically raised four kids by herself. And a lot of you guys back in our area can understand how tough that is, simply because, you have to, one job just wasn't going to do it. You weren't bringing in enough funds to support four kids, so she worked two jobs. And as a child, I was your typical bad kid. I enjoyed sports, and I think that was sort of my avenue to sort of walk on the straight and narrow, because it sort of kept me in line, kept me off the street, and kept me out of trouble. But that was my way out. Eventually, it ended up my way out. And my mother was a very strong woman. She's no longer here, but she ruled with an iron fist. She had some tough, bad kids. But but through basketball, I played several sports, and I excelled in all of them. I became All-American in basketball. That was my best sport, actually. And was fortunate enough to reach the point where I was All-American in high school and had offers from a lot of different colleges and universities. At the time, I set my focus on Loyola Chicago.
Loyola of Chicago.
Yeah. Now, why Loyola Chicago? Well, I knew you were going to ask that. Simply because they had the previous year won the NCAA championship.
So what year was
I wanted to
that?
go to a winner. I'm sorry?
So what year was that?
What year? That was in '63.
Okay.
Yeah, they won in '63. And so naturally, you want to go to a famous school, a school that's a winner. And they did a great job of coming down and recruiting. They recruited very heavily. The coach there was George Ireland. And he really wanted to bring in a guy who can help his program to keep the winning process going. The other thing also was that my teammate from the previous year had gone up there. He was a much better player than I was. And he had gotten injured, but he had played well. And I heard stories about his experience up there, and it really helped me a great deal in terms of making my mind up. But what I didn't know was that it wasn't about my decision, because I was telling all the reporters here I'm going to Chicago. And my mom found out about this, and she said, you know, I see you having all these interviews about going to Chicago. She said, that's not where you're going. I said, what do you mean? Because I wanted to get out of town. I really wanted to get out of town for sure. You know, I was in a city where naturally grounded in the Southern recruited me very early. But I just wanted to get away. And, well, she got together with Guy Lewis, and they made the decision for me. So it wasn't my decision. She said, this is where you're going. Here's an opportunity for you to be the first black athlete at the University of Houston. I had relatives here as well, so she felt very comfortable. But for her, it was an easy decision simply because the opportunity was there. I didn't see that. First of all, I didn't want to go anywhere where I had to make an adjustment. I mean, Chicago was the area where they had white and black players. I really, unlike Gene, I had no interest of being a pioneer. I just wanted to play ball without any adjustments. Now, I grew up with a guy, a lot of you from the 60s remember, is Rap Brown, H. Rap Brown. Well, he lived 3 houses from me. I played ball with him every day. So naturally, I'm hearing all these things, and away from the fact that I had the individual experience of racism, because in Baton Rouge, you're going to be faced with that a lot. I mean, that was an everyday thing for me. But, you know, I played with him. I hear all the things. He was like Gene. He was an activist. And so as we were playing after the game, I hear all these stories. So that even sort of solidified things for me. I don't want to go to the University of Houston. I want to go somewhere where I don't have to make an adjustment. Well, that decision, as I mentioned earlier, was not up to me. And evidently, my mom, who's always steered us in the right direction, that was the right decision for me.
Well, Gene, that ends up influencing your decision. So tell us a little bit about your family in Marshall and how you ended up choosing U of H.
Yeah, well, I'm fortunate in the sense that on one side of my family, my grandmother was a domestic. On the other side, my grandparents were farmers, and they really didn't have hardly any money at all. But my grandfather and grandmother had sent 6 children to college, so I had a history of college graduates. And my uncle in 1964 was the first African American to be a professor, assistant professor at any predominantly white school in the South, University of Texas. So everybody in my family assumed that I was either going to Prairie View, where they had gone, or the University of Texas. And I kind of thought that until I heard that the University of Houston had signed Don Chaney and Elvin Hayes. And 2 things that work here, you got to understand. One, I have been, am now, and will always be a sports fanatic. And Don didn't know me, but I knew him. As a matter of fact, I knew him and didn't know Elvin Hayes. And so I said, well, if this school is progressive enough to at least take this step, something's going on. The other thing is more individual. I didn't start out as an activist. I started out as a party animal. And I had worked 2 summers in Houston, my sophomore and junior year in high school. So I knew most nightclubs here. I knew where to go and where to party. I had a lot of friends. And so for me, it wasn't going to be an adjustment living in Houston. So I decided I'd come to the University of Houston. So I made that decision. It was a good decision.
Well, let me ask both of you this. Were your parents concerned about you coming? Because we both know minority children then and now whose parents didn't have the courage or foresight to let them do something hard.
Gene, you want it?
Yeah, well, it was not a problem in my family because it is very hard, let me back up and say, it's very hard to have this discussion with the generations of people here. There are some folks here who are our age or a little bit younger who clearly understand and remember Jim Crow and the way the segregation worked in the South. There are other people in here who are students who are younger who don't have a clue as to how bad Jim Crow was. So let me just give you a prelude of that so you can understand the context of where we came from and why we were so angry at the time. Living in East Texas and living in Louisiana, the races were completely separated. There was no opportunity to meet and confer with a white person on anything except in a subservient role. It was understood in rural East Texas, at least, if a black man walked down the street and approached a white man, you were to look down and never to look him in the eye. It was a very humiliating and degrading kind of situation. All of the political and economic power resided in the hands of people who didn't look like us. Now, given that kind of background, there were a lot of our teachers and our religious leaders and our community leaders that said, you know, one day it's going to happen that we can do this, and you got to be ready. And so a lot of our parents and neighbors and teachers told us, you got to be ready. So the opportunity is going to come. And so it was almost sacrilegious when the opportunity came if you didn't take it. Somebody had to walk through the door. And for me at least, I had seen the police dogs on people at Wiley College. I had seen the civil rights movement throughout the South. And if people could go to lunch counters and face the wrath of being beaten, if folks could ride a freedom ride and know that the bus was going to be burned and they might die in it, somebody saying all I had to do was go to school. And I think I was arrogant enough to think, I can show these people how smart we are. Somebody got to do it, and I'm ready to do it. And so that was kind of an attitude that I had, and so I almost relished the opportunity to step forward. And I think my mother knew that once I set in my mind that I was going to do something, there was no sense in talking to me about doing anything else. She just said, have at it.
Now, Don, let me ask you this. Help us to understand why it was such a big deal to integrate college athletics. Why is that a big deal? Because today, it isn't.
It's really interesting. And my story is a little different from Jean's in that my mom had the vision, I didn't have it. She wanted the doors knocked down. She wanted a pioneer. She felt I had an opportunity to basically set things for people behind me. So it was a huge opportunity for me. She had the vision, I really didn't have it, because I was sort of tired. You got to understand, I grew up in a situation where if you go to the drugstore to read a comic book, there were a different set of rules. White kids can view the comic book, sit there for hours and read it, and decide whether they wanted to buy it or not. A black kid could not. He had to buy a book and leave. So we weren't permitted to even sit and go through a book. Okay? So you had different standards. I faced it, so I was tired. At a young age, I was just tired. I didn't want to have to go through these kind of things, in a new situation, in a new state. I just didn't want to do it. But my mom, she had the vision. She said, you got to do it, you got to make sacrifices, you got to go. My siblings didn't help either because, this is a true story. My brother actually showed up with a hangman's noose and said, this is going to happen to you at the University of Houston. I mean, those kind of things, I love him today, but those kind of things didn't help to ease the tension arriving at the University of Houston. He knew how tough it would be, and naturally, I guess he tried to ease my spirits a little bit by making me feel comfortable, but it was a tough adjustment. The University of Houston sports program, I felt when we got there, I felt that the pressure was on simply because not only did we have to make the adjustment, but we actually were playing for other people. And that was my mentality. I felt that if we did well, that was going to open the door for a lot of other people behind us. And I think I sort of adopted that simply because I kept hearing it every day from my mother.
Your mother had courage, and your parents did too. So in our research, we find that the university quietly integrates in 61. There's one black graduate student in music. In 62, more students who are graduate students. In 63, undergraduates. In 64, Don Chaney. In 65, Jean Locke. So tell us, either of you, what are your impressions when you first get here? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Where are you living?
Well, it was sort of familiar territory for me because I was used to being isolated and being in an area where, as I mentioned, I went to an all-black high school. I lived in an all-black neighborhood. We had a grocery store that was owned by Italians. That was the only white people we had basically any type of communication with. So coming to the University of Houston was not that hard of an adjustment for me because I was used to that. My first year here, came in that summer, there were hardly, and I knew there were black students coming on campus, but I never saw them. I never saw them the summer before school started. We were here a month before. I would come on campus, and I really never saw them at all. And as the school year progressed, naturally you would bump into guys, and you would go out of your way, hey, Don Cheney. I mean, you felt good because, I would jog to a guy if he was 3 blocks away just to introduce myself, And so that's how bad it was. But that first year was tough for me simply because we had an athletic dormitory. The campus itself had a big lake. The Cullen building was still here. But it was a nice campus, but very small. And I used the Cougar Den at the time. Now, when Gene came along, it was a little bit different. But I used the Cougar Den as a shortcut to my dormitory because I didn't have any blacks in there. There had no reason being in there. So I would go through there, right through my dormitory, because that saved me 5 minutes to my dormitory. But in terms of socializing, making friends, it was very difficult that first year. Second year was totally different.
And that was your freshman year. What's your first impression?
I came in 65, and there were more African-American students who came in my class. And so our numbers, though very, very, very small, probably doubled between 64 and 65. And still, we only had a handful. I think the most amazing thing for me was I got here in time for the social hour of all freshmen. And I walked into a dance, and I didn't know what to do. As nobody was talking to me, and I didn't feel I was permitted to talk to anybody else. And so I'm standing against the wall just kind of wondering, why am I here? And who's going to break the ice with me? And I think I had too much pride to go up and start introducing myself and hobnobbing with people who didn't. And I guess my experience was, for many of the students, my arrival was not on their radar screen. And it was crushing to me. I thought that people could appreciate this great social movement, that was happening, and the arms would be open, and it didn't happen. And so, like Don, when I then found the little cadre of African-American students, we just kind of bonded, and we hung to ourselves almost for survival. So that first semester, we lived all in a suite over at Taub Hall, across the hall from each other, and that was kind of it.
By your design or the university's?
University's design. But the second semester that I was there, I was asked to be the first of the non-athletes to have a white roommate. And I said, yeah, this would be great. I didn't realize at the time the problem was not me. The problem was with my roommate. He was arrogant, he was uppity, and he was Jewish. And none of the white kids who were Christians wanted to stay with him. So they solved the problem by putting the black and the Jew together. And we had big time fun. And so then the next year, still at the dorm, they asked me to be I don't know what they call it now, but it was basically the resident student there who would run the halls, and that's kind of what I did. And a part of my responsibility was to meet incoming students who were considering the University of Houston and show them the dormitory, and then, I didn't realize it, take their parents to dinner. And so the first crisis that I had was the university sent me to a restaurant with white parents to entertain them at a place where I was not accepted.
Wow.
And it just started to sour my taste. And so this great love that I had for the university when I first got here, that this was a great decision, started to quickly kind of change as I began to feel like, hey, there's something different about this experience. All I want to do is hear my music, study, and look at these girls. and I couldn't do any of that because I was all caught up in. And then one final thing, the roommate that I finally got was a guy then called Dwight Allen, Omawale Lathule.
Is he here?
Omawale came in with this radical nonsense about we got to change things, and he worked on me for a full semester. And it was only at the end of that semester, Don, that I really became the activist that I was.
Well, we're going to get to that in a moment. Tell us about your roommate and that experience.
Okay. Well, being an athlete, they housed all the athletes in one building. It was on North McGregor, and you had the football players, tennis players, golf, all of them right there. And we were the only two. Well, actually, we were only three because Warren McVeigh was in football. And it was tough. It was very difficult being in a dormitory, first of all, and I get to my roommate later. because you had downstairs, you had 2 TV viewing rooms, pretty large room. But the minute you walked in, sit down and watch TV, I mean, you had 15, 16 guys just get up and leave. So, that was hard. Then it became a game for us. Say, okay, let's go and disrupt these guys. So we would walk down and say, watch this, boom, they leave. But the interesting thing about this, though, after a while, those guys got tired of leaving. They stayed. But there were a lot of adjustments to be made. And the great adjustment was for me simply because I hadn't been around white guys. And I'm sure some of the guys had a hard time. But my roommate, and you have to give Guy Lewis a great deal of credit. Guy Lewis was the head coach at the time. I thought coming here, I would room with Elvin Hayes, the only black basketball player. So I thought the adjustment was very easy because now we were talking about a guy I can communicate with, a guy we can sort of share stories with, and I didn't have a problem. So it wouldn't be, as I mentioned, an adjustment point for me.
He's from Louisiana.
Right, because we had competed in high school against each other. So it was familiar ground for me. But what Guy Lewis did, which I thought was a great thing, is he made sure that 2 of us were separated. And my roommate was a guy from Brooklyn, New York, who had been around black athletes before. They were friends. He had friends who were black athletes, so it wasn't that great of an adjustment for him. But it was a huge adjustment for me because, like, as I mentioned, I'd never been around whites before. They put Elvin Hayes with a Jewish guy from Schenectady, New York. So he had also been around, blacks before. So the adjustment was tough because, you had to sort of make adjustments as you went. I mean, like lifestyles, language, everything was totally different.
Music.
Everything. I come in and, you had a battle of music. And I'm playing my music and you say, oh, you don't want to listen to mine. I said, no, I want to listen. It got to a point where, that was before headphones. It got to a point where it was a little bit tough. And we started sharing stories. And I think that's where the gap was bridged because I really had really not crossed the line in Louisiana until coming to the University of Houston. But and as far as thinking about New York, I mean, it's like a totally different thing for me because I had no idea I would be in New York. Didn't know anything about New York other than the fact that it was cold. But we started sharing stories, and he had never been down south before. So that friendship continued on. He's now a Hollywood producer, and we're like brothers still, and we communicate all the time. But that friendship just grew. The longer we were together, it just grew. But it was an adjustment.
Tell us about him using your toothpaste.
I found this out after I probably was in pros 8 years. And I went out to California, and he was doing he wanted to do a movie, and we started sharing ideas, and we developed this script for a movie. And it's still somewhere, Paramount, somewhere on the shelf. But he mentioned to me that he would go through my wardrobe when I was in class and just look at my clothes and try them on and things like that. But the thing that probably really turned me off after the fact was that he said, I even use your toothbrush from time to time. Now that's crossing the line. You talk about sacrifices, that's a huge sacrifice.
Didn't he tell you that he thought that your toothpaste had some particular power?
It was all different. Well, everything was different with him. He just wanted to know, there was a mystique about black and whites, and whites always thought that was something about being black that was different. And so naturally he wanted to experience everything just to see, even wearing my shoes, things like that. He just felt that there was something that I'm doing or I'm using that propelled me to another level. So I guess he wanted to experience everything. But I was shocked when I heard that.
He had as much to learn about
Yes.
you
Right.
as you did about him.
Right.
I'm going to come back to you in 1 second. Tell us what happened with your scholarship. You come as a freshman.
Yeah, I was the valedictorian of my high school, an all-black school in Marshall, Texas. And at the time, the state of Texas had a provision that if you were a valedictorian of your class and you went to a state-supported school, your tuition was taken care of. You still had to pay your books and I think your fees, but your tuition was taken care of. And I didn't have a benefactor for going to school. I basically worked and borrowed money, and I put myself through school. So having that, I counted on that tuition as part of how I was going to get through that first semester. And I went to, I guess, I don't know if it was the admissions office or financial aid, wherever it was, and told the lady there, well, I'm here, and I was valedictorian of my school. And she looked at me with this look, well, is that a real school? And I don't know if we can do that. And this was the first battle I had with U of H, trying to get them to recognize that my school, which was required by law to be segregated because that was state law, was a school that had to produce a valedictorian. I was the valedictorian. You ought to pay for my tuition. And that was the first one. The second one that was devastating was I needed to work to go to school. And they had a jobs bulletin, or at least, I don't know where it was now, but you could go to this office and they would help students find jobs. And I said, this is great, I can get me a job. And I quickly realized there were some jobs they couldn't send me on. So I would see a number of the postings, but they were for the white students. So the first job I ended up taking was a job at Rainbow Bakery, which is down the road here, down on Cullen Street. And the job that I had was as a janitor there. And the reason I was eligible for that job was because all of the janitorial work was done by African Americans because they were in a segregated class. And so for me, it was a series of these little cuts that I received at the university, one after the other, that kind of robbed me of the kind of joy that I had when I came in.
Don, you arrived with two other black athletes.
Mm-hmm.
So you said Warren McVeigh,
Right.
who was on the football team, and Elvin Hayes, who joined you in the NBA. So how do fans react? So you're on the freshman team, and they called you the Kittens. You weren't the Cougars.
Well, the interesting thing about, weren't grown up yet. Huh? The interesting thing about coming in as a freshman, and Elvin Hayes is sort of grew up in the same situation as I did. He came in from a smaller town, but we both had a lot to prove. And I guess you can say we had a chip on our shoulder because we knew that we were sort of put out there on the spot and that everybody was watching us. As freshmen, we just dominated every team we played. And the interesting thing about it, every year throughout the school's history, toward the end of the year, the freshman team played the varsity. And naturally, the varsity dominated the freshmen every year. Well, this is a different year. We killed them.
Do you remember this?
We killed them, and it was an adjustment simply because we had an adjustment to make anyway. They didn't like us because I think a lot of the athletes felt that we were there to take their jobs. So that didn't help our cause at all, simply because we had dominated and just totally destroyed those guys. And the most interesting thing about our freshman year is that the freshman team played prior to the varsity team. And people would be out the door, and Gene, you can probably attest to this, out the door lined up to see us play. After our game, they left. They came to see us play. We had a great team, and the biggest problem was the fact that I thought that was a pivotal game in that when the freshman team beat the varsity, I mean, things in the dormitory was not the same. It got worse, yeah. It was very, very tense, and, you're talking about small adjustments. There were all kind of adjustments. I mean, naturally, we haven't said this, either one of us, but the N-word was a common thing back then. Guys would be around corners, here come the end, you know what I mean? Look out, end's coming, you know what I mean? Stuff like that. And, it wasn't something for me that I hadn't heard before, but when you think you step into a class 1 university.
These are your teammates.
Exactly right, from your teammates, guys you're in the same dormitory with, it's a tough adjustment. So it was hell. I gotta say, it was hell.
So as the Kittens, you were superstars, but then your sophomore year, now you're on the varsity and you lose the first 3 games.
Well, see, what happened, because you're bringing in better athletes, you're bringing in black athletes, naturally the schedule changed. So we played higher caliber teams as well. Mm-hmm. The guy Lewis in the past had a great record, but he also sort of played teams that he knew he could beat. Well, being that we were on the map now, we played better schools, schools with better teams. So naturally, things got a little shaky from the start. And, everybody thinking that it's like any other sports season. When you start off well, then you have high expectations. So as freshmen, we had super expectations, and our start wasn't so great the following year. So naturally, everybody started doubting.
But how do fans react? Because the whole point of integrating is to win.
Right, it's all about winning. And, you know, naturally, from a fan's perspective, they say we brought in 2 black players. We're going to get to the NCAA, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to dominate. When that's not happening, everybody's saying, well, why don't we just go back to the all-white players? We don't need any black players here. We don't need to integrate. And that was the mentality of a lot of schools down south. You had a lot of old school coaches who did not want to bring in black players because of a lot of reasons. They weren't disciplined enough. They thought that white players as a whole were just better players. And once the ball started rolling where the black players on different teams, especially down here in the University of Houston, we started getting success, then that produced a little pressure on the other schools to bring in more black players. So in a sense, we are in our own way, other with Gene, his path was a little different. We were actually setting a trend, you know, for things to come with black players coming into schools.
Let me just say one thing, too. I think for those of us who were students, watching Don and Elvin and the other black athletes, we took tremendous pride in their accomplishment. And, you know, we were looking for little things just to help us get through and survive. And when these brothers would take the field and perform, it would give us a kind of extra and a boost that really meant a lot. And we never talked about it. I mean, Don and I had never talked about this, but it kind of helped to move the ball forward. They used to say something about coaches who had black players. This was not true about Guy Lewis, and I respect him for it. The saying used to be, you might have several black players on the team. You'd play 1 at home, you'd play 2 on the road, and if you were losing, you'd play 3 or 4. And that kind of mentality kind of showed that you couldn't do certain things at home with those fans but things changed. And one of the things that I noticed at the University of Houston that I hope we have a chance to talk about is the changes of attitudes among a lot of the white students and a lot of the non-white students, the Hispanic students, women, others who began to take on some of the same issues that we were taking on.
We are going to go through that in just one moment. But talk about what it was like for you, Dawn. U of H is integrated, but you're traveling around the South and you're playing schools where they haven't integrated.
Well, the toughest thing of all was that first year because we traveled a lot by bus and a lot of times by rental cars. And naturally during that period, you know, you have to stop immediately to get a sandwich or lunch. Elvin and I, we had to stay on the bus because we weren't allowed in some restaurants. There were restaurants still were not service in blacks. So our food had to be brought to us. It was just tough, the tough situation, and we had an adjustment. What I really like about the coaching staff at the University of Houston, they really anticipated the different racist situations out there, and they served as a buffer for us because they didn't put us in any precarious situation. You know, if we had to stay on the bus, we stayed on the bus for our protection. You know, and you know, as I mentioned, coming from Louisiana, that's the way it was. It was something that was accepted, something that was practiced. The white on, colored only water fountain, and that's an everyday thing. You see that, and it was something that you had to live with. You went to black theaters, could not go to white theaters. I grew up in Baton Rouge, where I was 1.5 blocks from the LSU's campus. Okay, and I could hear the football games on my back porch, but I wasn't allowed to go to that school. Couldn't attend that school at that particular time because it wasn't integrated in sports.
But I have one more question before I come back to Gene, and that is, okay, sophomore year, things get a little better. You start dating a pretty freshman, Jackie Dotson, who was kind enough to come today because she is your wife.
Yeah.
And so you start dating this pretty girl from Worthing, and what happens one day when she's so excited that she gives you a big kiss?
Well, we were, I think, returning from a road trip, and it was a successful road trip. I forget who we played, but it was a big team that we beat. So naturally, you had the reporters and everyone there meeting us and greeting us, and fans as well. And my wife no, my girlfriend at the time, came up and gave me a kiss. Well, the Cougar paper, I think it's the Cougar paper, took a picture of us kissing with the players in the background, the plane as well. And because my wife is fair-skinned, they thought it was a white girl. So, I don't have to tell you the rest of that story. The Cougar paper received, from what we hear, bomb threats from that incident, thinking that was a white girl. And, you know, it's really interesting how, although we were on a good team, we were playing well, we were accepted by everyone at the time because of our skill level, but still, I mean, there's still that old thing about crossing the line. Mm-hmm. And, you know,
you're
they weren't quite ready
18,
yet.
19 years old. How do you handle that?
Yeah. It was tough to hear that, but as I mentioned, it was all about adjustment for us. And simply because we had gone through things like this before. I can tell you a story. We were dating at the time, might have been my second year at the University of Houston. She and I went to Louisiana to visit my folks. On the way back through DeRidder, Louisiana, I had a new car, and she was driving. I was tired, so I had fallen asleep on the passenger side. And this car passed by us with about 4 white guys in it, and they pull over into what you call a turnout, where you're reversing the direction. Well, they pull over and turn out, and as we were coming, they fired 3 shots at us. Okay? And it was just little things like that. And I tell my kids
Little
these
things.
stories. Yeah. I tell, you know, it's hard for them to believe this because, you know, they're in a world now where things are different. But being black, growing up in the South, you face those kind of things all the time. And my wife just floored it. I mean, she didn't hesitate. She took off. And I'm yelling, stop, he's scared another black guy. I use black guy, but they turn around. You know, they're going back saying that they're fighting some more ends, you know what I mean? And I don't know, but it's those kind of things that you're faced with. And I became head coach at the University of Houston. I still was faced with the same thing. A reporter stood up, and at my first press conference said, well...
With the Rockets.
Yes, with the Houston Rockets. And he said, well, the one thing that will make Don Chaney a good coach and a fair coach to everyone is that he's married to a white girl. You know, those little things you constantly hear. Here's a girl who went to an all-black school at Worthing High School.
She's a Worthing graduate,
Yeah.
Senator Ellis.
Right. But those kind of things are the things you're faced with, you know, all your life.
Well, Gene, maybe that answers my question, my next question to you, which is, you could have just kept your head down, gone to class, and hoped nothing bad happened, but you didn't. So what was it that pushed you towards activism, both in the campus, on campus, as well as in the community?
Well, I think certainly the precipitating thing was my friend Dwight Allen Omawale Lethuli. I mean, he was just on me for a whole semester that we've got to do something to make a change. And so I give him a lot of credit for moving me from where I was to what I became. But I think the larger context was, we were in the middle of the 1960s. The world is changing. And those of us who were college students had some appreciation for the fact that we were uniquely positioned to help change the world. Internationally, colonialism was breaking down or had broken down. People were struggling against what was then called American imperialism. At home, women were fighting for rights. Gays were fighting for rights. Hispanics were flexing their muscles, wanting to be recognized as a force. And the civil rights movement was in the forefront of all of that. And so if every day you hear of people putting their lives on the line to make a difference, and they are college students, it makes you ask the question, well, you're sitting here at the University of Houston very comfortable. You know there are problems here. You're sitting in Third Ward. You know there are problems in Third Ward. You're sitting in Houston. You see the racism in Houston. When are you going to get up and do something? And so it was almost that, but when you put those two things together, somehow we connected with students at Texas Southern University and formed kind of a group of folks. And then we found out, you know, there are black students at the University of Texas who are complaining and, you know, they're going to do something down there. Let's go down there and join them and raise some hell down there. And all of a sudden it became the cause for your being in school. And this was just as much for us. I mean, we didn't belong to sororities and fraternities. You know, we weren't a part of student government. So how do you take this group of black students who had been overachievers in their all-black schools, who had been presidents of their student class, on student government, valedictorian in your class, and how do you then give them some opportunity to show leadership skills? And the university is not giving it to us. We just simply carved it out for ourselves, and it happened to be the civil rights movement, a great cause. And we were at the right place at the right time. And I don't take any real credit for it. If history had been different, for those of you who are history students, if it had been different, it could have and should have happened in my mother's generation or before, or before that, but it didn't. It was our generation. We took the step. There was nothing unique about us. It was just we were right place at the right time.
Well, describe how the protesting started. There was a committee for better race relations.
We started out with an organization on campus called the Committee on Better Race Relations, and I was the chairperson of that organization, and it was a multiracial group of Houston's U of H students who were genuinely concerned about race relations on campus. And, we started making requests of the university for change. And we made request after request after request. Got a little publicity that didn't really go far. But this group also began to recognize that there were problems in the city. And for some reason, we got involved in some of the community affairs. And there were a couple of community protests that we were part of, and there were a couple of occasions we got arrested and went to jail. And so all of a sudden, this started to kind of mushroom into an organization. We went from that to an organization called Afro-Americans for Black Liberation, which was an organization that really got created in 1968 that was a more in-your-face organization for the university. I think after a year of kind of begging and talking and politicking and trying to get things done, we were an impatient group at a time when most people were impatient. And we were unapologetically impatient. We were going to make change. We got to make it right now. We can't wait. And that organization had the good fortune and the common sense to recognize that there were other students who were not black at this school who were just as concerned about the same issues. And if we worked with them, we could do all kinds of things. And so one of the first things that we did was to get Lynn Yusan elected as homecoming queen here in 1968. And it was a miraculous thing that an African-American woman would even be entered at that time into a discussion about being homecoming queen. Well, we didn't think she was going to win. We just wanted to see. Really, when we recruited Lynn, we didn't ever think she'd win. The deal was, how do we use this as a campaign to further work with other groups in a political sense? So this is just a vehicle to get to something different. And we realized that there were a group of non-black students who were tired of the fraternities and sororities running everything, and then there were some international students who had never been heard. There were gay students who had never been heard. So all of a sudden, we had this coalition of folks, and we got Lynn elected. And at that point, it was almost like, hey, we're here. We can do some damage here. Let's get it on.
Talk about the dumpster demonstrations and how that led, in your own experience, to the TSU riots.
Well, it didn't lead, but it was partial and partial. In 1967, May of 1967, there were a lot of protests in the city. One of the protests that I was involved in was at the Holmes Road dump. For 13 years, that community had been protesting a dump in the middle of a city dump in the midst of a residential area, and the city refused to close it. And a young kid, I think 11 or 12 years old, drowned in the dump. And that sparked a political protest. And so a number of us from the University of Houston went out to the Holmes Road dump with the then Reverend Bill Lawson at Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church. And we were going to hold a protest down there. And we had this clever scheme hooked up where we would have our people lay down in front of the dump trucks. And of course, if they got too close, we'd jump up and run. We understood we were in Houston and we could only go so far. But before the protest got underway, HPD, who had a lot of surveillance on student activists at the time, realized that Bill Lawson and I were the two leaders of the group, and they arrested us and put us in jail. That same day, there had been protests in what is now the North Forest Independent School District about racial incidents out there, and TSU students were involved in that. For some reason, while we were in jail, things broke at Texas Southern University. There were allegations that there were guns on campus and gunfire. It led to the police raiding the school. There was gunfire, unfortunately. Bullets ricocheted, a police officer was killed. So in the midst of this horrible situation, I'm sitting in jail, and this is a true story. And we're all singing freedom songs and trying to survive in jail. And Bill Lawson is praying for us and leading us. And I asked Bill, I said, Bill, why don't you pray one more time for us? And Bill didn't answer. And so I hollered out, Bill, why don't you pray for me? Bill didn't answer. I realized later that HPD had come and got Bill Lawson out of jail. This is the same police department that had put him in jail. They came, got him out of jail so he could go over to TSU and try to quell the riot over there. I mean, it was the irony of all ironies. But those kind of incidents really empowered us to feel like we could make a difference and make a change.
But riots sparked by Wheeler Avenue, running through campus, involvement of U of H students?
Yeah, the TSU incident had a lot of dimensions that were unique to TSU. We had issues that were unique to U of H, and then there were a host of common issues that were common to both groups. And we worked very, very closely together. Some of the student leaders there were very, very active in our group. And so after that incident was over, that was going into the summer of 1968. It was pretty clear that the fall of 68 and the spring of 1969, I was going to be a senior, and some of the others were getting ready to move on. If we were going to make any meaningful difference at U of H, we had to plan an assault on the campus, and that led to the formulation of 10 demands that we presented to the university in January, I think, of 1969. And the demands were revolutionary at the time, but when you look back at them, they were just almost plain Jane. First one was that the university create an African American studies department. And then that the University of Houston hire more black faculty and staff. That the University of Houston provide more financial aid for students, particularly minority students. That the University of Houston recruit more minority students. One was that the university would treat black athletes better. And one that I'm most proud of was that the university, two that I'm proud of, the university would give academic credit for people who worked in the inner city in trying to make a difference in people's lives. And the final one was that the service workers, the janitors and maids at this school would be paid a minimum wage. So now those were our demands, and they were considered revolutionary. It led to a series of negotiations with the school. Ultimately, we tried to put as much pressure on as we could during the spring of '69. But as a result of all of it, most of those demands in some form, shape, or fashion have been met. We now have the African American Studies program, Dr. Conyers, who is, I think, the second oldest in the country and thriving. The number of African American students, Hispanic students, Asian students, international students at this campus now is phenomenal. The student aid is certainly better than financial aid is much better than it was. There's more black faculty and staff and minority faculty and staff. And so in some ways, we can take pride in all of that. But I'll tell you, Allison, it was a painful experience. And having gone through it, it left me with a bittersweet taste that I carried with me for a long time. And for years, and I mean years, I just would not consider the University of Houston. I wouldn't put it on my radar screen. It was too painful to talk about the results of kind of what happened here. And it took me some serious reconciliation to come to terms with the fact that U of H was changing and had changed, and I need to change my attitude in relationship to U of H.
Wow. Well, Don, coming back to you, now you're a junior. So tell us what's happening with the team.
Well, naturally, we're a very good basketball team, and we're sort of on the map now. People know who we are. We're winning games. We're playing against better competition. And so we're sort of recognized not just amongst people or the students here at University of Houston, but throughout the nation. We went to the Final Four that year, played very well. The following year, we went undefeated. We won 31 games in a row. The following year was a pivotal year simply because we sort of set records. We sort of put the national college basketball on the map.
Is this for the first time for U of H?
I'm sorry?
Is this for the first time for
Yes.
U of H?
Yes. We played UCLA, who was also undefeated at the time, in the Astrodome.
So this is
And,
the game of the century.
Game of the
So let
century.
me stop you a minute. Is anyone here, did anyone here go to the game of the century?
Somebody lying. Somebody lying.
You were at the game of the century. So stop 1 second. Tell us from a fan perspective about the game of the century, and then we'll let Don tell us from a player's perspective.
Well, first of all, before I talk about the game of the century, let me talk about a player named Don Chaney. Don Chaney was a hell of a basketball player. If you're putting a team together, you got to have some rebounders, some scorers, you got to have floor general, and you got to have somebody just to kind of the glue of the team. Chaney was a great defensive player. I mean, he probably was the best defensive player all around in the history of this school. He was a very good rebounder, but he was a leader on that school. And when we needed some points, he could put it up. So this guy is no slouch by any means.
I needed you as my agent. It's a little bit late now.
But that game was phenomenal because UCLA had been 2 or 3 years undefeated.
Right.
I can't remember exactly, but they had this phenomenal record. They had not lost a game.
Remind us who was on that UCLA team.
Well, you had, go ahead, Gene. You remember?
Well, you had Lucius Allen, who you all may or may not know, who was a real good guard. But the man in the middle that everybody talked about was then called Lou Alcindor, later known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And Kareem had been nationally recognized as the greatest high school basketball player ever out of, I think, Powell High School in New York. And so when he went to UCLA and they just kept winning, everybody knew they were just going to dominate. And so for most folks, this was a great game that was going to be in the Dome. It was going to be a chance for U of H to get on the map, and it was going to be nationally televised, so we'd get some publicity. And we wasn't going to be beat too bad. That was kind of the attitude.
So Don, who's the mastermind of this?
Well, Guy Lewis was part of it. There were several people who were, of course, UCLA's coach John Wooden, but there were other people involved in putting this thing together.
And is it also exciting because the Astrodome is fairly new at the time?
Astrodome was fairly new, the biggest thing around in terms of arenas. And at the time, there was no national televised college basketball games, just to give you an idea of how unique that was. So this particular game put the basketball at the college level on the map. So what they did, they really built it up great. It was a great deal to where they really promoted it very well. It was the first national televised, national radio announced college game, played in an arena for the first time with 52,500 people. That record stayed for a regular season for 25 years. Wow. Okay, just to give you an idea of how devastating it was. It was like unbelievable. No one had heard it in a place that was designed for baseball and football. So it was very, very unique. They imported the baskets from a different place, imported the floor from a different place, the rims from a different place. So they really promoted the thing very well. What they sort of hadn't figured out, as Gene was saying, we knew we were good, but we knew we couldn't beat UCLA. And we beat them. And that was like the shot heard around the world. It was unbelievable. And what's unique about Houston is that they follow their teams, and some of you who are Houstonians know that you stand by your team all the way. They showed that game all day long for a week. I mean, there were a lot of housewives upset because the soap operas were taken off the air. Like, all day long you saw that game, and it was just unbelievable. You would walk downtown, people would call you in the store, ask you if you want this, you want that. It was unbelievable.
So it was one of the biggest things in sports that ever happened.
Yes, it was huge.
Did you ever get to be friends with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar?
It's really interesting. It's interesting. I played with him.
On which team?
On the Lakers. We played together. We went to the Western Finals together. So in college, there was definitely, I wouldn't want to say a hate situation there, but you didn't like those guys. Now, Elvin Hayes, I can't say that he's still friends with them. Those guys competed 18, 20 years in professional basketball. And they still hate each other, okay? But I did play with two members of the UCLA team. Lucius Allen, who was in the backcourt with me with the Lakers, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the center. And, we were beaten by Portland for the championship.
Don, is this true that you are the only player to have played both with Bill Russell and Larry Bird?
That's true. And does that make me old? That's 3 decades right there. From the 60s to the 80s.
That's great.
Now, there's a little footnote, which was, this was a regular season game. Mm-hmm. There's a little footnote.
Yeah, we won't forget about that.
Okay.
But just to finish the story here. Now, I have an excuse for this, to a degree. Naturally, we talked about how great UCLA was. They were a great basketball team, very well coached, and we beat them. There's no doubt about that. We beat them. Naturally, some people are saying we beat them because Jabbar had injured his eye, which to me, I totally disagree with that. He got beat, Now, we met them in the playoffs, NCAA playoffs, semifinals. They killed us. But the thing that goes unwritten is that the guy who played in the backcourt with me, a guy by the name of George Reynolds from New Jersey, was ineligible because of his grade points. So UCLA did some research. They found out that because he was a junior college transfer, and they found out he didn't have the grade point average to play. So prior to the game, he was taken out of that game. So he didn't play with that. So we didn't have the same starting five. Now, that's our excuse. Okay. Away from that, they beat us.
Well, in almost wrapping it up, so you end up with the thrill of victory. You told me that you're graduating from the University of Houston, and you're either going to jail or law school. Yeah. So tell us why there was that dilemma for you as to what the future would hold.
One of the great things about being a college student is you're in an intellectual environment and you have the opportunity to express yourself. This First Amendment rights that you students have, you need to exercise them and give you. I exercised mine was I was at the University of Houston, and the penalty for exercising my First Amendment rights was I was charged with inciting a riot. And so when I left the University of Houston, I have the distinction of being the only U of H grad to get both a diploma and an indictment for inciting a riot within 30 days. It left a real bad taste because we were negotiating with the university at the time, and they had told us that this matter would not be subjected to criminal punishment. I didn't realize at the time it was not the university's call, it was the state's call, and somebody higher above President Hoffman made the decision that these guys need to be punished. And so we literally had to stand trial. So for me, I didn't go the path of going on to law. I went to law school for a semester at Texas Southern, then dropped out because my trial was going on in January of 1970. So, I left U of H really kind of pissed off at the school and just bad. But it was years later that Nia Becknell, who is deceased now, she was working at the campus as a staff person. She approached me and said, you need to help us reconnect with the university. You are one of the leaders. You need to be responsible for this. And she convinced me it was the right thing to do. And we first started the Black Alumni Association. And that was the beginning of my kind of re-love. And I came back to the school and I began to see, really how it's changed and the tremendous progress that has been made here. And all of a sudden, I got excited about being able to make a contribution to the new University of Houston. The University of Houston that can and is going to be a leader. And, I'm now, I own season tickets to football and basketball. I give some of my wife's money to educational scholarships for the university, so I'm all in.
Oh, what a perfect conclusion. Thank you. Before we conclude this part, let's open it up to any questions.
Can I do one thing first?
Yes.
There are members of the audience who were at U of H when I was here, and I think you asked them to stand. Can I get them to do that again?
Absolutely.
Those who were at the University of Houston when I was there.
Wow. Okay. So here, Susan, right down here. Here's your first question.
This isn't so much a question as a comment. I'm Jimmy Walker, and I graduated from the university in 1966. I had a very different experience. Number one, I don't know any other black students that might have graduated before that time, but having gone to initially to the University of Illinois in 1960 to major in architecture, because this was private and segregated, as was Rice, as was A&M, and I couldn't live in the dormitories at UT. I was at the University of Illinois for 3 years, from 60 to 63, and at Texas Southern from 63 to 64. Now, the University of Illinois was not a pleasant experience for me as a black person coming from Fifth Ward. The University of Houston integrated, as I understand, in 63, 64. I transferred in 64 and finished the last 2 years in 64 to 66, getting a Bachelor of Architecture and a Bachelor of Science. My experience was, of course, now, mine might have been very different from Gene's. Nobody knew I was here. And the School of Architecture was most supportive. They got me my first job working at city planning because Roscoe Jones was on the faculty and headed city planning. I was another job as a landscape architect with Gregory Catlow, who was here. I subsequently became a partner with Bill Jenkins, who became dean of the School of Architecture, and was further supported by becoming associate architect on Paul Chu's building over there. For me, having gone to the University of Illinois, this was a very pleasant experience.
Good.
A most supportive one, and I too spend some of my wife's money here all the time.
Thank you.
But
Does someone else have a question for Dawn or for Jean?
I wanted to ask about Theodis Lee. When did he join you? Was it 1 year after you all came?
He came the second year.
Okay, he was a great ball player.
I'm sorry?
He was a great ball player.
Yes, he was.
I'm not a U of H man, but Allison, the 1967 incident
Yes.
at Texas Southern University, we call it the police invasion, not the riot.
I did want to ask one question in terms of, Gene, while you were here on campus, you were just a student. Don, you were a celebrity. What's the difference, Gene, in just walking around as a regular student as opposed to being the basketball superstar? What was the main thing?
Well, I never knew how it felt to be the superstar on campus. So it's hard to compare. But I think certainly the first year there, I felt like an invisible person. I felt lost and isolated. Now, some of that, in fairness, is you're a freshman at a big university that's got 30,000 students. And anybody who walks in that environment new, and you don't know anybody, you feel like you need to make some connections. You feel lost. But some of it was attributable to race and the fact that the races were not comfortable interacting with each other, and so I felt restricted in what I could do. But I think by the second semester, there were certainly enough African-American students, enough white students, enough Hispanic students, enough women who were friends now. and international students. And I had my own little posse that I kind of hung out with. We made our niche of folks, and we did fine.
Gene, you want to tell them what tuition was, what your scholarship was worth back in fall of '65?
I'll just say this. My son Thomas is now the last of the Locke family who's a cougar. My tuition was a hell of a lot cheaper than his.
I just want to say I'm a 1972 freshman and a 1975 graduate of U of H. And I just want to thank you for paving the way for me and my generation to come here. Because it was very easy when I came.
Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your stories. I'm a Rice student, graduated from Rice, and also there's an interesting history as Rice went through its integration period. What was the interaction between black students from Rice and black students for University of Houston? Was there any interaction? Because I know when I came through during the 80s and 90s, we spent a lot of time at TSU and at University of Houston.
Well, there was limited opportunity to interact with black students at Rice because there were limited black students at Rice. There was Charles Freeman, and there was Charles Freeman.
Wow.
And that was it.
And then he left.
And then he left and went to TSU. But what I did not say in the interest of time, but it's really, people have to have some socialization, and you find that in some form, shape, or fashion. The truth of the matter is a lot of us in 1965 and 66 who didn't feel that we had a home here with the network at U of H, we'd haul over to TSU and hang out at TSU, and we'd make lots of friends over there, and that became a kind of a place for us. And students at Rice did the same thing.
And Don, that was true for you?
Yes. And at the time, you can drive straight through TSU's campus, which is a great thing because cruising time is fantastic.
To Gene Locke. Any plans for any political aspirations?
Yeah, I do. I aspire to be home with my wife and kids having fun. No, I do not anticipate that I'll ever run for mayor, and I do not anticipate that I'll ever run for a political office. I hope that I have the health and the energy and the wherewithal to make a contribution. I hope that God always blesses me with the ability to make a difference in people's lives, but I don't think that difference will come from elected office.
Thank you both so much for sharing your story. I'm a 2008 graduate of the University of Houston, and I'm currently an adjunct professor in the Department of African American Studies. I just want to know, what is your message and your objective for black students at the University of Houston today?
Well, I don't know that my message for black students is any different than my message for all students. I think now that I'm 65 years, I appreciate the fact that hard work and serious study at this age is so fundamentally important. And while we laugh and joke about school being a place to have fun, and it really is, it's first and foremost a place to study. And so if I say anything, that's the first thing I'd say is, study your butt off, learn something. And this is a very competitive world, and you've got to be prepared to compete in the world. The second thing that I would say with regard to the university is, I think I like the idea of U of H as a Tier 1 school. I like the concept of U of H being internationally recognized. But a part of being a Tier 1 school is not just the academics, it's also the service. And this university, if it's going to claim Tier 1 status, you've got to have a footprint in this community. We've got to see you here and know that you're making a difference in people's lives. I challenge any of you to you're at the age when you have no economic deterrent, you still can be ideologically pure, and you can be intellectually challenged. Go out and try to make a difference in somebody's life.
Thank you. Well, we are going to take a very brief 5-minute intermission. First of all, though, thank you so much.